Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Chris coming at you with another episode to the Beautiful Struggle podcast. And this is episode number 92. And for all my new listeners out there, this is a personal development and business podcast. And we drop a new episode every single Monday of the week. So you don't want to miss out. Feel free to join the community, subscribe to the podcast, and share this podcast with one other person that may need to hear this podcast, because we're going to have an amazing guest on today. We're going to talk about a lot of dope things that we've never talked about on the podcast before. So before we get into that, a little bit about my guest today. She is a real estate investor. She specifically invests in rental properties, such as long-term leases and short-term leases. Airbnbs is really her, we could say, her bread and butter. That's something that we're going to dive into as well. Also, her goal is to help other first generation investors gain the knowledge and confidence to begin building wealth through rental property ownership. And let me tell you guys, she's just a complete boss. So I'm super excited to have her on. And with that being said, welcome the young Queen Tracie. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for the intro. I'm super excited to be the first to grace your podcast with
Yeah,
in this space. So,
right.
hopefully I can bring some of my knowledge and experiences to help, to help out with anyone who's interested in getting
Absolutely,
started.
absolutely, yeah. I have to say thank you for jumping on the podcast. Thank you again for giving us a piece of your time. It really means a lot to us. Before we jump too deep into it, I'm super curious. I've been following you for a little bit now, and I see that you love to travel. A lot of my guests love to travel. I love to travel as well. I'm curious, where is the next place on your destination list, like somewhere big that you really want to go, maybe like your dream destination or something?
Okay. Well, I did put a little bit of thought into this because I recently, I've kind of started getting into travel and
Hmm.
I'm starting to move now towards sort of international destinations. So
Love it.
I am, fingers crossed, who knows with the whole pandemic and the circumstances around us right now. But if presented the opportunity, everything aligned, I would love next year to start travel a bit more in the Caribbean,
Mm,
to the Bahamas, Turks and
mm,
Caicos, which is like, they're closer than, I guess just big sky thinking.
right.
Eventually, would love to travel to Johannesburg,
Mm,
in Africa. There's a couple places
love
on the
it.
list, but I think that I'm like gonna try and kick things off next year,
Mm.
near for sure the Bahamas. So
That's amazing. I seen that you were in Puerto Rico recently, so that's a great start right there.
yeah, that was my first time on an island. So I was
Really?
super hyped for that, and just
Yeah.
making the most of the experience right now where we are. So
Hmm.
in a COVID world, like still being able to figure out ways to enjoy the experience and just be in the moment. So yeah, it was
Absolutely.
really
And how was that experience for you? Because you said that was the first time you've been on an island. I mean, I know we all know Puerto Rico is U.S. territory, but if you actually go there, it's like it's its own damn country. So
pretty much.
what was your experience there? Like, what were some of the things that you learned? And because I always say one of the best ways for me and for anybody to learn is simply by getting out of your neighborhood and just traveling somewhere new. What are some of the things you've seen and experienced out there?
I think for me, I enjoy just being a part of the culture there.
Hmm.
I think one of the things that I kind of picked up just within the culture of San Juan, where we were, was a much more relaxed pace than what
Hmm.
I'm used to. Um, I mean, it was something, no one was in a rush to do anything. It was
Hmm.
just sort of, maybe it's the places I encountered and stuff, but people were, they took their time, I guess. They were intentionally
Hmm.
took their time. And I even pulled something from that experience, because sometimes I would be sort of antsy about going places, doing things, getting something done. But like just the general culture seemed to be a lot more relaxed. So I
Hmm.
kind of noticed that, but other than that, just the places that we visited, the the architecture. I think Old San was like my favorite spot.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it was amazing to take in, and I
Mm-hmm.
would definitely return to that country just to see more of it, and not
Mm-hmm.
try to push so much. We did kind of a lot of touristy things, but just to enjoy it a bit more from I guess the local perspective. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that because how we are in the United States. We are. It seems like we're always in a rush. We're always on the go. We're always trying to hustle. I live in California, and I feel like if you live in California or New York, it's like times 10 because I'll go to other states and I'm like, y'all moving too slow. Like, come on, let's go. We're always in a rush. So yeah, I definitely love that, and I agree with you. I've been to Puerto Rico as well, and Hawaii's the same way. Like they're really relaxed. They take their time, and I think that's something that definitely that we can apply. To our life. We don't always need to be in a rush. We can take a step back and really enjoy at the moment, be in the moment.
I agree, and it's those things that I just love picking up from traveling places. It's always fun to
Mm-hmm.
do the excursions and stuff, but if there's anything else I could take and just apply it or reflect on it sometimes to just, bring it full circle, then, I enjoy like picking that stuff up when I travel.
Absolutely. So the Bahamas. So we're gonna play this back when you're in the Bahamas because you're speaking life into it, and you're gonna go for sure.
Real.
Absolutely. So yeah, I would love to on this podcast. I'd love to dive into your background and you growing up. Where did it all start for a young Tracie, and kind of the evolution to where you are right now.
Okay, so I'll kind of think within the spectrum of like financial sources. That's sort of just where, the financial space there. But um, I am originally from a super small city that I'm sure if I name dropped it, 0.1% of the world would know. But for just sake of describing, near New Orleans, maybe about 45 minutes from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Oh,
So
what's the name of the city?
yeah, yeah. So it's pretty much that area is where I grew up, and I was raised with a family of four other brothers and sisters with
Mm-hmm.
my mom and dad. That was sort of my childhood upbringing. Um, I pretty much made my first move ever to Lafayette, Louisiana
Mm.
for school. So I attended the university out here when I was maybe 20, oh, not 20, sorry, I'm thinking the wrong dates, like
Mm-hmm.
19. I
Mm-hmm.
started there. And then from there, I switched out my major a ton of times. So I eventually settled on languages, modern languages, Spanish. So I got my degree
Mm-hmm.
in Spanish with a minor in business.
Mm.
So from there, I'm just fast forwarding to I'm still here in
Mm.
Lafayette, and I recently just went back to the university to get my MBA. Finally,
Mm-hmm.
that was last year. Super crazy times, just
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of the pandemic and all this other fun stuff. Sort of taking classes and a bit sort of hybrid stuff, but I was able to push through that and get that nice little plaque on the wall there. I'm kind of proud
Congrats,
of it.
congrats.
Um, but yeah, ever since then, I have really been educating myself and learning in the financial space, particularly in real estate investing.
Mm-hmm.
That journey started for me when I was 25 years, 24, 25 years old. Right today, I'm 29. But
Mm-hmm.
that journey started for me those 4 or 5 years back. At that time, I was teaching. I was a
Mm.
Spanish teacher at a local
Really?
school. That was my day job. I was doing that sort of my 9 to 5. And then on evenings and weekends, I was actually working for a local sandwich shop. So I was always on the go. I just remember always being moving, trying to just do a lot, hustle. But
Mm.
I mean, today I look back and I say it's hustling backwards, but I was just
Right.
always moving. And I remember I was living with a roommate, and it was just really challenging for me financially to excel. it seemed like I was just in a place where there was just never enough money. It was a very challenging space. So it got to a time I'm with a roommate. She's graduating and she's going to be moving out of the state. So my general pattern of how I lived back then was, okay, I got to find another roommate, or I have to find someone who needs a roommate, and I'll kind of move like that. That was just sort of the mentality and what I was used to from just living, with other people, etc. But anyways, the way that I really discovered the whole short-term rental space and the real estate industry in general was through a friend of mine who, just weirdly enough, they were traveling somewhere to Coachella or something, and they're like, "Hey,
Mm.
we can get it for the cheap if we do it through this platform called Airbnb." And
Mm.
so I'm like, okay, cool. So they take that trip. That's the first time I ever heard of it. They come back. They said it was awesome. It wasn't sketchy. It was pretty cool. Um, and this is during a time when I think Airbnb was really starting to push for growth. It was
Mm.
still kind of viewed as that couch crashing platform where you just kind of rent a space, but they were really trying to push it and expand to, like, I think, get to like more private space, private homes and
Mm.
stuff. But they were pushing the whole private rooms were really popular and stuff.
Mm.
So when I heard about that, I was planning a trip myself. I was getting ready to take my first trip on an airplane to Florida
Mm.
with one of my sorority sisters, and we were like, "Hey, I've kind of heard of Airbnb. Let's test it out and just see how it goes." So we booked an Airbnb with a home host out there in Fort Lauderdale. Took the trip. It was awesome. It was
Mm.
a private room. We only had a room in their home, but the location, you couldn't beat it. It was like walking distance to the beach. They let us use the bicycles to get where we needed. Anytime we had questions about something, they were able to like direct us and give us all these recommendations and stuff. And so it
Yeah.
was a really, really great experience that I had with the platform. But I can always remember as I was there that I couldn't get off my brain, like, once I get back, I've got to do this. Like, this is the answer to my
Mm.
problems with the whole roommate situation. Back then, it was just very, not as wide
Yeah.
thinking. I was like, okay, this can help me, like, not have to find a roommate. I can get by. So I was kind of excited to try it from my apartment. Um, Long story short, I once my roommate moved out, I set up her space. I bought her bed from her. She left it. I was like, cool, got a bed, put a little furniture, put little things in here, make it look nice. So, and I listed it.
Mm.
Yeah, I listed it, no questions asked, just put it up there. And I remember getting my first guest, who was a traveler coming for work, just staying for a night. And everything went well. I was
Mm.
pretty excited that it worked. So throughout the month, I was still renting from that spot. And at the end of the month, I think I got close to covering my full rent for that apartment. So
Wow.
I was like, hey, granted the rent was only like $700 or so, but I was like, hey, this makes sense. This makes financial
Yeah.
sense.
It's a win for
So
you.
exactly. So, I mean,
Yeah.
once I found out that that could work, I started to continue that for a few months. And I wouldn't advise anyone to try this now without seeking out the proper permissions to do so.
Mm.
But back then, I mean, you learn and you grow. But
Yeah.
I did, after just sort of examining my lease and learning a little bit more about my own apartment, that I couldn't technically sublease out to,
Mm.
to other guests. So that was sort of that was against the terms and conditions of my apartment. But
Mm.
thankfully, I was super low key when I was doing it. I never got,
Mm.
caught up with it. But once I did discover that, in the terms and stuff of my lease, I was like, well, okay, now I've got to stop, or
Mm.
I could figure out how I can keep doing this. So that's really what prompted me to start searching YouTube, finding out what information's out there. Ran into the Bigger Pockets channel that,
Mm.
so many investors are following that community. I ran into a couple of other channels. I just started to binge them like
Mm.
every day, or any time that I would just get an extra hour or something. Like, some people will go to
Mm.
Netflix and just go watch something. Like, I would just, okay, tune in YouTube, find a new video, just watch it. And
Mm.
so that gave me a lot of education in the area. And it's what pushed me to ultimately go and say, okay, I feel confident enough to just jump in the water and try this out.
Mm,
So yeah, from there, long story short, today I've learned so many lessons in the industry, and I've been able to successfully acquire properties for Airbnb and for lease tenants as well. And it's just been a beautiful journey that I've gotten to
mm,
experience this far.
mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot to break down in there. We'll definitely, I would love to dive into, how people can possibly do this for themselves. But before we do that, like I said, there's a lot to kind of break down. I'm curious, just kind of going back to you growing up in your what was the name of the city, by the way,
The
that you
name of
grew
the
up in?
city is Amite. And it's actually
Amy.
it's Amite City is the technical name, but it's a town by population. So I thought that
Okay.
was pretty cool. It's the town of Amite City. Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'm curious, you growing up, did you have anybody in your family that was like entrepreneurs, investors? Um, did anybody speak about like, the investing and money and whatnot? What was that conversation like growing up? Was that even a thing?
Gotcha. Well, you brought it up. That really wasn't a conversation. That
Yeah.
was I mean, my parents, they did the absolute best that they knew
Mm-hmm.
how. Um, but I like those types of conversations kind of didn't exist in our household or
Mm-hmm.
among me and my brothers and sisters. I think, obviously the school system is so lacking in teaching that sort of stuff that it was unfortunately something that I didn't really grasp a lot of until maybe I was 23. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
was 23 years old, and I remember just like being at my student apartment, and I maybe had applied for a credit card or something, and I remember getting like a letter in the mail. Like when you do the approval online, they either I learned that either if you can get instantly approved, they'll send you the email, send you to that, and be like, congrats. But if you don't, they'll send you like, okay, thank you for submitting. We will reach out to you and let you know, yeah, yeah, yeah. Usually the
Mm-hmm.
reach out is the denial letter. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they sent me the denial letter and they said it was, they sent me also my credit score. And I just remember getting the paper and I remember seeing like my credit score was maybe like it was in the 500s. And I just remember that moment because I was like, is this bad? So I start Googling it to see like, is this a bad credit score? And so I just remember those types of moments. And then, it just started to make me more interested in like finances. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably in a bad position right now. If I'm having trouble with making ends meet, like I've got to be in some kind of, I've got to figure this out. So yeah, unfortunately, those things weren't something that I was able to get from family,
Mm-hmm.
or just sort of investors or any network type
Mm-hmm.
of thing. But I think that's why to this day that I really want to serve as I want to take in that space to be able to help educate others who perhaps come from shared similar experiences
Mm-hmm.
where parents grew up with the mindset of survival, and they
Yeah.
passed that
Yeah.
down, and that sort of thing. But just kind of, I just want to do my part to contribute to
Yeah.
that conversation.
No, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you. There's a lot of people on this podcast and listening that have been in similar situations where we just were not educated, And the reason why I asked that is because we, on this podcast, like we're always talking about creating generational wealth and breaking those generational curses. So when I see people like yourself that, take that initiative to stop the uneducation and you want to educate yourself and you take that leap of faith to try something that's completely new. Like I'm pretty sure at that time, if you were to possibly tell you, maybe they would agree with you, but tell your parents that you're jumping into Airbnbs and renting out your apartment, they're gonna be like, "What the heck are you doing?" Um, so I love that you took that leap of faith to try something new, and that's really the spirit of an entrepreneur. You got to have that mindset where you just got to figure it out. Sometimes that's just the answer. Like you just got to figure it out. I don't. There may not be a roadmap to how to do things, but you just got to figure it out. So I love that you took that incentive. You went on YouTube University. you know, and you learned all you could about.
I am an avid
Right,
supporter
right, right.
of YouTube University for sure.
Absolutely. So I definitely love that you took that leap of faith. That's awesome. So I'm curious now. Well, before we jump into it a little bit more, I was on your website, and you had a quote that said you can invest in real estate right where you are, and that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. It's start with what you have and start where you're at. You know, a lot of people think, you know, to chase their dreams or to even get into real estate. Let's talk about real estate specifically, that you need to have a bunch of money. You need to have a real estate license. You need to be a real estate agent and this, that, and the fifth. But in your situation, you're saying that you can just start literally where you're at and with what you have. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes,
Cool,
you're
cool.
able to get started on your journey right where you are. Yes.
So yeah, I love to jump into it, jump into the actual Airbnb business. Um, you know, I'm sure after a lot of researching and connecting with other people, you started to find out that I can legitimately do this and create actual business out of this. So, what would be like the first steps for people out there that want to jump into Airbnbs?
Sure. So, and this is actually a question that I've been getting so commonly lately.
Yeah,
And it's almost a question people don't know how to ask. They just say, "Hey, can I get more info?" Or what
yeah.
do you know? Sometimes they don't know the right questions to ask. But I had to. Oh goodness, sorry. Let me turn
No,
that
you're
off.
good.
Okay, so basically, the first place that I like to always push people whenever they want to get started, they've obviously heard a bit about the platform, or they've maybe seen someone else's success with it, and so now they're interested and they want to figure out how they can get it into it. Um, I always push first. What strategy do you want to follow or do you want to use
Mm,
to get into it? Because
mm-hmm,
there's two really big ones when it comes to Airbnb. There's that strategy, like that buy and hold strategy, where investors will purchase their own property and they will, do any renovations, whatever they need to it to hold it, to basically rent it out, either through a property manager or themselves. So they actually invest in the purchase. Then there's that other side, which is the rental arbitrage route, which is I've seen all over the place now, but I had no clue about it when I
mm,
originally purchased. But that whole concept of leasing out a space, an apartment, a house, a condo, leasing something from a landlord or a property management company, and then subleasing it out to your guests, to your
mm,
tenants. So those are two really great strategies, but they're also two very different ones,
mm-hmm,
two different pathways to walk. Um, so that's like really the first thing I would give people who are interested, figure out which strategy you want to follow. There's
mm-hmm,
pros and cons to each one, and you've decided according to your investing goals, future thinking, not just I want to start an Airbnb and make some money, but like 10 years down the line, what do like the sort of thinking beyond just the now,
mm-hmm,
and making that decision first. And then once you decide which strategy you want to use, it's also important to figure out where you'd want to implement it. If it's something you want to do right there in your hometown where you are, or if it's something that you want to do remotely from somewhere else. Perhaps there's another area, city of interest that you think would just be way more poppin' to have a listing because there's more traffic, more tourism, what have you. So deciding where it is that you want to take on that endeavor. Which for me,
mm-hmm,
it was in my local area. All of mine are currently local. But I think that's another big thing because that's going to help you further move and research what is allowed in your area.
mm-hmm,
What type of laws will prohibit certain things when it comes to short term renting? While Airbnb particularly has been around, I think, since 2008, so at
mm-hmm,
least maybe like 13 years or so now. Um, it's been around for a little bit, but laws are literally just catching up. And I know in my
mm-hmm,
city, within the past year, they've started to even pass more. legislation around what you can and can't do as basically an Airbnb owner or manager. So
Mm-hmm.
researching those laws is super important because some cities that are super, I guess, supportive of the platform have little to no, or just haven't caught up, or
Mm-hmm.
have little to no local laws about it. And there's some cities that have very strict laws down to whether or not you've got to live on the property while you're renting it out,
Oh wow.
or even I've seen restrictions on the number of days you can even rent out per year. So you have certain limitations depending on your area. So as you're researching location and deciding where, that's super important to find out from the jump, I think, as well. But yeah.
No, I was gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Atlanta, didn't they recently make it illegal or something like that, or they tighten up their restrictions? What did they do specifically in Atlanta?
I know what you're referencing because I did see some mention of it, but I can't give you particularly, I don't know
Mm,
specifically what they did, but I think that's like the perfect example of just how much the
yeah.
legislation is ever changing. And if I'm not mistaken, it may have had to do something with corporate housing or the whole rental arbitrage concept because that's I know that's super hot in Atlanta to have
Mm-hmm.
apartment units and stuff leased out. But those rules can change so often. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people understand that it's so consistent. You know, there are condo associations who will just decide, okay, this affects our residents in XYZ way, and so our general um, condo association have decided we will no longer do this, and your entire business model is now cut out from that
Mm-hmm.
location. So there's so many things that come into play. I know in my area, what they recently did, it was because of, I think there was a disturbance that happened in some kind of way with Airbnb that came up to our council meetings. And so they had votes. And now I think a new legislation is that your rentals, if they are in residentially zoned areas of the city, then they must be owner occupied rentals. So
Mm,
that makes you have to go look up your local zoning maps to see where this home is that you could have purchased 10 years ago and now you Airbnb because it's in this area. You know, you are required as the owner to live on the property or else you could be fined or shut down.
mm-hmm.
So thankfully for me, because I did purchase some years back, but thankfully for me, I am in a mixed use area just by chance, so
Mm,
that I'm able to still comply with that. But there are many hosts who it
yeah.
obviously affected who may have been in those areas. So all that to say, those local laws do play a big part and they are ever changing. So it's just something to take into consideration when you consider the different risks involved.
So I'm curious. Maybe you can answer this, but why are they so restrictive with Airbnbs? Like, why do they want to have some cities want to have so much control? Is it because it's hurting their business in some type of way? What is it that some of these places are making it so hard for people to make an actual business out of it?
That's a good question. If
Mm-hmm.
I had to answer personally, just from my own observations, I do feel that particularly with Airbnb, there are other platforms, but I know that's the name standard, that's the most common.
Yeah.
I know that they launched a couple years back a lot of their new strategies for growth as a company before they went to the IPO. Before
Mm-hmm.
they did any of that, a couple of years before they started this big announcement launch, and back then I think each year Airbnb was having these conventions for all the hosts to come together. You know, it was sort of like an Apple's thing. That's what I compare it
Yeah.
to, like
Yeah.
Apple. They were doing stuff like that, and I remember the CEO doing an address about pretty much growing our the perception of Airbnb. That switch from being a couch crashing sort of platform,
Mm-hmm.
like here's a open space with a local, to being to competing more so with hotels. So apart hotels, I remember that word, like the sort of, it was a different shift.
Mm-hmm.
So I think now, since that shift, there's been more competition with hotels for sure. And perhaps some of that shift has caused some static in many different cities. I think that in combination with these markets that are becoming super saturated, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how strict or how structured some hosts may be when it comes to
Right.
their listings. It could, I know a lot of apartment complexes who just won't allow it, period,
Mm.
just specifically because of different instances that have happened. So I think it could be a combination of things there.
And so when cities like Atlanta tighten up the restrictions, how does that indirectly affect you, or is that something that you just keep an eye on and watch if it comes to your city? Like, how does it affect you?
Well, I definitely think that other cities could follow suit for sure.
Right, right.
And I think that is definitely to come. Like I mentioned, I feel like a lot of it is just playing catch up right now. That's a really good question. I think for me
Mm-hmm.
personally, um, because I did go the route of purchasing, and I think between both of the strategies, that's, yes, I started with that one, but it's just been my preference. I've
Mm-hmm.
done the rental arbitrage route before, and it definitely served a place in giving me more cash flow. The reason I did it, I approached a landlord about renting out his duplex a few years back. And I specifically approached him like, hey, I have a property. I want to acquire more properties. I'm not in a financial position yet to get more properties, so I would like to rent yours out. I can, pay a certain XYZ rent and do this. To get me in a better position, I would take the cash flow and invest it into my own. So I did it
Mm-hmm.
specifically with a purpose. Um, Not to knock it, it is a great strategy, but I think I prefer the buy and hold, because it does feel more flexible in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
if legislation came down and I was, let's just no longer, period, able to do Airbnb, I would still be able to work out other things, either with a long term tenant,
Yeah.
which you could do through, let's say, rental arbitrage. You just found a long term tenant who occupied. However, you're paying such a high premium for rent often
Mm-hmm.
versus if you
Mm-hmm.
were an owner. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because if, for example, in my area, if you were to look up an apartment, the size of my house, let's say a 3 bedroom, 2 bath apartment, if there are any that exists. But if you were to
Mm-hmm.
find that, um, your rent would be likely up there, maybe in the 2 grand. Let's say 2 grand
Mm-hmm.
for rent alone. But currently, with my home, I'm able to pay a mortgage on that to the tune of like $600-700. So you get a much bigger margin with doing it that way, and you're also sowing into that. You're sowing more equity. You're getting the
Mm-hmm.
ownership built as
Yeah.
well. So for that reason, I feel a little bit better, and I don't think that the any crazy, legislation would directly affect me just because I took that route.
So now I have a couple questions. I'm curious about you owning. So let's take the strategy that you're currently doing. You own the property. Um, why do you put it on Airbnb? Why don't you just put somebody in there for it to be rented out? Is it because you can make more on Airbnb, or is it what is it? What's the pros to putting it on Airbnb as opposed to just putting somebody long term in there for like a year or two?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that for me, beyond it's that what I started with, because some landlords are tried and true. They would much rather just stick to having one person as a tenant,
Mm-hmm.
getting that completely, passive. They don't have to worry about anything from like the lawn care, like none of that stuff. They
Mm-hmm.
just prefer that option, and it makes so much sense. I think the most attractive thing to me for the Airbnb route was, like you mentioned, it's the cash flow.
Mm.
The money, I believe, in most areas is will be better, considering that your location gets some consistent travel, whether it is for
Mm-hmm.
leisure or what we're seeing as a constant trend now is business travel,
Business, yeah.
things beyond just leisure.
Yeah.
So I think for that reason, I prefer going that route the
Makes
most.
sense.
But also, I think that the property is able to remain in such a good condition from the consistent
Mm.
turnovers, etc. I do enjoy that as well. I mean, I don't know. I guess just it could just be
That
a
makes sense.
personal preference thing outside of the profits, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's been my experience. I've actually, yeah, I have long term tenant as well. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it.
Mm-mm.
It really comes up to your personal preference and your goal.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what your financial goals pan out to be.
So earlier you kind of mentioned, I think you kind of mentioned like step two for the rental arbitrage, and that's going to the landlord and saying, "Hey, I would like to rent out your property so I can sublease it." Correct? How complicated is that, or is it just all? Is it all determined like what their rules are, what they accept?
Yeah, I get this
Mm.
question a lot too from,
Yeah.
people who have such challenges with wanting to go that route because it's less money up front, it's less commitment up front.
Yeah.
It could be an easier way in, really, like into real estate investing. But securing your spot is like one
Mm.
of the biggest challenges I hear from people who go take that route. Um, I guess the best advice that I could give, or from my experience, what I did, and probably the reason why it worked so well for me, honestly, is because I had some stake in the game. I was able to
Mm.
approach, by the way, I think approach is everything. I was able to approach the landlord from the position of like, hey, I have a property as well. I'm renting.
Yeah. I've been
I
doing
am a
this.
landlord as well.
Yeah.
So that was like sort of a strength that I think I had when I was able to reach out to them. But beyond that, I think one of the biggest things that people have to remember, this has to be an upcoming YouTube topic, Chris. I'm gonna have to make this video.
Talk
Um,
about it. Talk about it.
I think sometimes people don't recognize that everything is an exchange. Any partnership, there's
Mm.
an exchange. I work for a nonprofit, and pretty much anything that we do for the community, oftentimes, if it's not something, a gig or something they pay us for, you pay us in the form of thanking us in front of thousands of people, or
Yep.
it's an exchange. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of people approach and ask if they could do something, or, if they can, hey, can I benefit from this? But they're not giving what benefits could cut, like what benefits would exist for that particular landlord. Or, like I think that's one of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest things that I see. Um,
Absolutely.
that everything just has to be an exchange, and you've got to be able to present to them how they're going to benefit from what they're allowing you to do. And I think that approach perhaps could help more people to who are seeking, specifically in
Yeah.
the rental arbitrage space, be able to secure something. I was thinking of an example. I was gonna give you an example with that. One of the things that another thing that I did in my position, beyond just trying to create some type of connection with the landlord, um, I think it's ideal to point out why it is their space is ideal, and
Mm.
then give them basically something in a sense of security. I
Mm.
offered like, hey, I'll give you 100 more than the rent because my profits could likely be a lot better. Um, I ensure that your space will be kept in a great condition because it's ultimately my business. My business would suffer if it wasn't. And
Mm,
I offer to give a larger than requested security deposit. I also proved that I had cash reserves if everything fell apart and I just could not get a profit. I have cash
mm,
reserves available to just pay out the lease and move on. And
mm,
I think being able to establish that good rapport with them, they didn't question so much my motives. I think that helped me to get more of a standing leg with approaching a landlord because they'll be able to see how they could benefit. Okay, she's prepared to make repairs in the event something
mm.
happens. Those types of things. So, yeah, I think I can't stress that enough that you've got to be able to present to someone why they would want to allow you to work with them and borrow something, an asset as big as their own property.
No, I totally agree, and I love that. That's definitely something that people should take note of. If they want to do that, you got to come prepared. You can't, half but this. You have to go all in. And like you said, I love that you said that it's an exchange. And when you're doing this exchange, you got to show the value that they're going to receive by committing to this partnership. If they don't see the value, why are they going to do this? Right. So I love that you said it's an exchange. No, that's super dope. So the process to get your property on Airbnb.com, the actual app, is that like a complicated process? There's like loopholes you have to get through, or is it pretty simple?
Complicated. I think they've tried to make it as simple as possible to get as many
Okay.
hosts. I think they're really pushing to
Yeah,
get more hosts.
that's what they
But
want. Yeah.
basically, it's a super simple and quick process. I do think if you want to maximize your revenues from it and main, gain and maintain superhost status, all these things, it's going to take more time to sow into it.
Mm,
You want to make sure that your listing is presented in the best way possible. You've put as much thought as you can into your description, and any challenges that you may have, particularly with your property, because no property is perfect. There will always be
mm-hmm.
something, whether you're too close to traffic or something and it's too loud, or if whatever the case may be, you want
Mm,
to be strategic about the way that you present it, but also very transparent. So, how can you
mm-hmm.
turn any sort of negatives? Oh, the apartment walls are paper thin. You can hear people. Whatever the case is. How can you figure out a way that you can be transparent, but also still attract people to your property? So,
Mm-hmm.
just thinking out those things and how you're going to go forward with a really good description and all these other things I think would make a difference between someone who just wants to list and get started and someone who really wants to excel in the business.
So you mentioned presentation. What are like the top three things that needs to be on point? Because I know when I use Airbnb, if your pictures are janky looking and it looks like you took it off a iPhone 3 or something, then I'm probably not going to book with you. But the ones that have like
Free.
typically iPhone 3, 4, whatever, 6. If it's not good qualities, then I'm not gonna want to book with you, right? So, what are like the top three things that you notice consumers gravitate to? Obviously, the description. Having the super host is probably important, and maybe the pictures. But in your opinion, what are like the top three?
Well, you mentioned obviously having a well thought out description, having your photos that accurately reflect your listing
Mm-hmm.
and with really good lighting, because even, I support great photography. Even if your photos aren't the best composed, as long as your lighting is on point, lighting has
Mm,
so much to do with a good photograph.
right.
But yeah, making sure your photos are super presentable. One thing that you can't change, but I think getting into it is super important, and I learned this the rather hard way, is your location is
Mm,
super, super important. And I think that's from the jump a significant part because once you're in a place, you can't really change it as
yeah.
easily. So, yeah, location super important. Um, I just think being able to research your area and find out what competitive advantages exist,
Mm.
because there may be people, for example, in your area who just don't allow pets. They don't want to deal with the pet deposit, the additional cleaning. They just don't want to allow pets. And there may be many pet travelers who find your Airbnb, which may allow pets. So having that sort of, you now have that advantage of attracting more pet owners to your homes. That's a real example, because it's something I noticed in my area, that a lot of the Airbnbs don't allow pets in the home. But I've been able to work around that strategically by
Mm.
allowing pets conditionally with a pet deposit, a non-refundable deposit. There has to be a minimum number of stays for having a pet there, and it must be under a certain weight and hypoallergenic. I can throw in some conditions, but because there aren't barely any other Airbnbs in my particular area of the city that offer that, I think I've been able to
Makes sense.
capture some more of that traffic. So I think just getting strategic about things like that, thinking very
Yeah,
business minded, and how you
that's
can see
good.
it as more than just this is a space I rent out. Like, how can I operate this as a business?
Absolutely. No, I love that. Like sometimes when I book on Airbnbs, I love when they're like, "Oh, it's half a mile from the train," or it's a mile from downtown if you go this way, and they give you those advantages of renting out that place. But I had a question for the people that are looking to post their property on Airbnb. Obviously, there's probably thousands and thousands and thousands of properties on there. Once you list it, your property is probably not going to be on the first page, the first couple pages. How can people improve their ranking? Get their property from the last page up into the first one or two pages.
I think for that, a large portion of it is going to be establishing your reputation on the
Mm.
platform. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've recognized from getting my spaces to superhost status, ensuring that you're getting your 5-star reviews. I
Mm.
think right now for my that property, I have at least 4.9 or greater. That's what
Mm.
I maintain. I think you have to maintain at least a 4.8 to get superhost status, if I'm not
Oh wow.
mistaken. But ensuring that you are getting that. So when your guests are leaving, always thanking them for staying at your place, and then pinging them to leave a review for you. I'd like to say, if you enjoyed your stay, if you could assist us by giving us your honest review. If there was anything that perhaps could have been improved, if you can include that for us in the private review section. So
Mm.
I always ask for things like that. Um, Another way I've been able to maintain a really great review, particularly with my area, and this is what I was bringing up about location and why I get
Mm.
so I think I should stress location so much, because my Airbnb is in a very prime area of the city, but it can be very noisy because of its location, because of the
Mm.
passing train, because of the street traffic. So many things can become really noisy, and your location is one of those 5 things that you are ranked on. So I
Mm.
was getting five stars on everything except location, and it was
Mm.
bringing down my score. But I was able to message guests and let them know. We recognize that we are located here, and we are super transparent about our location. If you felt that we were open, honest with and transparent about all of these things, please rate us according to our transparency, because we
Mm.
can't move our house for you, sort of
I
thing.
love that. Yeah.
But I think just being communicative in that way has really helped to sort of
Hmm.
maintain that score for us. So yeah.
No, I absolutely love that. We're getting close to the end. I have a couple more questions about Airbnb. I think one big one I had is, coming out of the pandemic, how has the Airbnb space been? I know prices on everything have been, through the roof. A lot of things have been a lot more expensive. A lot more people are traveling right now, and they're getting outside their house. How has it been for you? Have you seen like an influx of new customers, or what's the space looking like for Airbnb? And maybe where do you, after that question, where do you see Airbnbs in the future?
Well, I think just because, like you mentioned, with the pandemic, so many people have just been trapped inside their homes or felt limited to the places that they could go. So
Hmm.
now that there are a bit more, now that we're more laxed on the limitations, and not only that, but the different events and things that we couldn't have previously
Right.
are beginning to sort of, I don't want to say
Happen.
completely launch. It's such a weird space because where
It
we are
is.
with the pandemic, who is to
It's
say
like
over the
it's
next
like
couple months?
exactly. I was just gonna say it's like every state is doing their own thing. Depending on where you're at, it really just depends.
Exactly, exactly. And with the talk about the whole variant and things like that, it's really difficult to know, like, short term wise what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that people ever lost their desire to travel. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think being inside for a pandemic made people say, okay, I realize I don't want to go anywhere. I think it heightened that and we just weren't
Mm-hmm.
able to. But now that desire has always been there. So I do think that travel will continue. The specifically with Airbnb, yes, but I also know that there is a prime opportunity for other platforms like Airbnb to get involved because they are popping up.
Mm.
There's at least four other platforms, well, three other. There's
Really?
the Verbo, which is one platform that functions very similarly to Airbnb. I
It's
know
called. You said it's called Verbo.
Verbo or
Oh,
VRBO is the acronym,
got you.
and they function very similar. I think they may have been around before Airbnb, actually,
Mm-hmm.
but that's one platform, and I use that one as well to keep my calendars filled. Some hosts even use Booking.com for their spaces,
Mm.
for their condos or vacation homes. Some people go directly to that. I recently found out about Furnish Finder, which that one may be specifically tailored for corporate professionals or travel nurses, sort of in that space. But all that to say that there are opportunities now that people have become more accustomed to that whole shared economy that Airbnb brought forth.
Mm.
They were the ones who did it the best and scaled
Right.
the fastest. But that opportunity is there for other spaces and for people like me and for hosts to take advantage of it so that way we don't feel as if we're tied to one particular
Right.
platform. There are other options and other ways you can make it work for you.
Absolutely. I love that. And you also have a YouTube channel where you'll be educating people on, business, investing, real estate, Airbnbs, correct?
Yes, yes. You can
Would
find my YouTube and my Instagram page with my brand name, Melanin Millionaire. And I'm
mm,
sharing on those platforms, like you mentioned, all things financial freedom and wealth building through real
mm,
estate. So it's a
love
lot of
it.
the content is specifically granted. Financial education is for everyone. I don't want anyone to ever feel like they aren't a part of it. But I know a lot of the experiences that I speak to specifically are shared experiences with my
Mm,
own and perhaps people within my own community, hence the Melanin Millionaire, but a lot of shared experiences that we've had. So that's why a lot of it's targeted there. But yes, my channel and my YouTube channel and my Instagram, Melanin Millionaire.
awesome, awesome. So before I let you go, I always have the guests leave the audience with one last piece of advice, one last gem. I'll let you think about that real quick. If you guys have listened to this episode this far, you heard how amazing it's been. Please share this episode with one new person that's going to help with the growth of this podcast. Also, leave a rating and review on this podcast. Give us some feedback and tell us how you love this episode. And the floor is yours. You can go ahead and leave us with one last gem, and we'll end it on that note.
I guess the
It could
gem
be.
that I would give is that If you are worried about how long it's actually going to take for you to achieve a certain goal or dream, just stop stressing and do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Do what the clock does and keep going, because that time is going to pass
Mm,
anyway.
I love that. That's powerful. Leave the audience where they can find you one more time, your YouTube, your social media one more time if they want to reach out to you and ask you any questions.
Absolutely. On YouTube and Instagram, you can find me under Melanin Millionaire. And that millionaire at the end is actually spelled with the
Mm-hmm.
HEIR. So the air, play on words there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave the your links to everything in the description of this podcast. Once again, I truly appreciate your time and coming on here and giving us that game about Airbnbs, investing, and finances. I really appreciate you. And on that note, it's your boy Chris, and I'll catch you guys next week. Peace.